Hi, I hope you're having a great day. First off, I want to apologize for not being able to answer all of your questions on time. As some of you might already know by now, I have a full-time job as a caregiver here in Japan, and I am not really on YouTube 24/7. Regardless, I still do encourage you to ask your questions. I will, to the very best of my ability, answer all your questions. With this, I decided to compile all the recent questions in this channel and answer all of them in this video.
Welcome back to NikkoVenture.
I may have already answered some of these questions by directly replying to them in one of my videos, but for the sake of everyone following this channel and for the sake of everyone who haven't seen those questions in one of my videos, I will answer them again. But this time, I will answer them as clearly and as detailed as possible. So, without further ado, let's answer those questions. Hi! May I ask if working visa and SSW visa is the same? And our school offers a student visa program. Should I apply for it or choose SSW? Thank you for that very wonderful question. First, let's define what is a work visa. A work visa is some sort of a work permit. When you have this work visa or work permit, you can enter a foreign country and work in that particular foreign country within a particular time. In our case, we need a work visa to enter Japan and work as a caregiver. Without a work visa, we cannot work here in Japan as a caregiver. There are different types of work visa here in Japan if you want to work in this country, and these are as follows. The work visa for a professor, an artist, a religious activist, journalist, business manager, work visa for legal and accounting service, work visa for medical service providers, researchers, instructors, work visa for engineers or specialists in humanities and international services, work visa for intra-company transferee, and work visa for nursing care, entertainer, skilled labor, specified skilled worker, and a work visa for the technical intern trainee. And as you can see here, the visa of a specified skilled worker or the SSW visa is on this list. That means that SSW visa is a type of work visa here in Japan. So if you are a specified skilled worker and someone asks you, what kind of visa do you have? You can answer work visa, specifically specified skilled worker visa. However, it is very important to remember that these work visas are not the same. No. For example, the specified skilled worker visa and the nursing care visa are both work visas here in Japan. However, the SSW Type 1 visa will only allow you to work in this country for a maximum of 5 years. After 5 years, if you fail to transition to SSW Type 2 visa or you fail the Kaigo Fukushishi Kokkashiken, you must pack your things up and return to your home country. In contrast to that, the nursing care visa, which is a type of work visa issued to a person who passed the Kaigo Fukushishi Kokkashiken, will allow you to work and live here in Japan for as long as you like. That's why some of us call the caregiving visa or the nursing care visa or the Kaigo visa the most powerful visa for caregivers here in Japan. As for your second question, I cannot decide for you. The decision should be done by you, and only you. Because dude, you will be the one who will work here in Japan as a caregiver. And working here as a caregiver in Japan will never be easy. So decide it for yourself. Weigh all your options and think about it carefully. What I can do for you is to give you a little bit of idea about student visa if you're planning to work here in this country as a caregiver. If you apply for a student visa, you can only work part-time. No full-time jobs, and you can only work for a maximum of 28 hours per week. It is only during long public holidays or Nagai Yasumi that you can work for a maximum of 40 hours in a single week. However, as far as I know, there are only 2 Nagai Yasumi here in Japan for the entire year. That means that for the majority of the year, you can only work for 28 hours per week. Why? Because always remember that you have a student visa. You will come here in Japan as a student. You will be a student here in this country. And the main purpose of a student is not to work, but to study. And needless to say, the salary of a student visa holder is small. I know this because I was a student visa holder myself years ago. If you want to know more about becoming a student visa holder here in Japan, click this card here or check the link in the video I made in the description down below. If you choose to have the SSW visa, you can work full time. That's 8 hours a day plus overtime for 5 days a week or more. With an SSW visa, your salary will be much bigger compared to the salary of a student visa holder. However, the challenge for an SSW visa holder who wants to become a Kaigo Fukushishi here in Japan is to find the time and discipline to study for the Kaigo Fukushishi Kokkashiken. That's because working as a caregiver here in Japan is physically, emotionally, and mentally demanding. And finding the time and disciplining yourself to study after work or even during your rest days will be difficult. So, after hearing all of those things, should you apply for the student visa program offered by your school or become an SSW visa holder? Dude, it's up to you. Caregivers can transfer to SSW2 visa category? No, that's a big no. Despite the recent expansion of the SSW program that allows the industries of the SSW Type 1 to transition to SSW Type 2, caregivers here in Japan that are under the SSW program cannot transition to SSW Type 2. No. Just no. I will say it again. Caregivers working here in Japan under the SSW Type 1 cannot transition to SSW Type 2. There will be no SSW Type 2 caregivers here in Japan. Just no. Out of all the industries that can transition or transfer to SSW Type 2, the field of caregiving is exempted. To understand why SSW Type 1 caregivers are unable or cannot transition or transfer to SSW Type 2, we need to understand what are the benefits of becoming an SSW Type 2. When you become an SSW Type 2 here in Japan, you can work and live in this country with your family for as long as you like. That's because the SSW Type 2 visa is a type of long-term work visa in Japan. On the other hand, the only way for caregivers here in Japan to live and work in this country with their families for the rest of their lives is to pass the Kaigo Fukushishi Kokkashiken. That's the national examination for caregivers working in this country. In other words, SSW Type 1 caregivers here in Japan doesn't need to transition to SSW Type 2 to be able to live and work here in Japan as long as they like. They don't need to. They don't have to, because SSW Type 1 caregivers already have a way to be able to live and work here in Japan for as long as they like. And that way is the Kaigo Fukushishi Kokkashiken. Again, the only way for caregivers, foreign caregivers, to live and work here in Japan with their families for the rest of their lives is to pass the Kaigo Fukushishi Kokkashiken. If you want to know more about the Kaigo Fukushishi Kokkashiken, click this card here or check the link of the video I made in the description box down below. Does this mean po na pwede na mag-transition to SSW2 visa ang mga galing sa food service industry? Yes, of course! With the exception of caregivers, everyone can now transition to SSW Type 2. If you want to know more, click this card here or check the link to the video I made in the description down below. Hey Nikko, I'm from Nepal. Can I get the Kaigo visa if I work in Japan for 5 years as an SS worker? First, I want to say thank you to everyone who is not a Filipino but is following this channel for years or months. Thank you so much. So, If you are an SSW Type 1 caregiver here in Japan, you don't need to work for 5 years in order to take the Kaigo Fukushishi Kokkashiken. No, you only have to work for at least a minimum of 3 years as an SSW Type 1 caregiver here in Japan. After you worked for 3 years as an SSW Type 1 caregiver here in Japan, you are now eligible to apply and take the Kaigo Fukushishi Kokkashiken and have the chance to become a Kaigo Fukushishi and receive the Kaigo visa. Okay, but do I have to live for 5 years first to give that exam, or can I prepare for it while working on SSW1? If I pass, can I get it within 2 or 3 years of working in Japan? Please do reply. Again, as an SSW Type 1 caregiver, the minimum requirement for you to take the Kaigo Fukushishi Kokkashiken is to work as an SSW Type 1 caregiver for a minimum of 3 years. I know that being an SSW Type 1 worker or caregiver here in Japan will give you a maximum of 5 years to work and live in this country, but you don't need to finish those 5 years to take the Kaigo Fukushishi Kokkashiken. No, out of those 5 years you are given to you as an SSW1 worker, you only have to finish 3 years to apply and take the Kaigo Fukushishi Kokkashiken. If you only finished 2 years out of those 5 years, you cannot take the Kaigo Fukushishi Kokkashiken. If you finish 3 years out of those 5 years, you can take the Kaigo Fukushishi Kokkashiken. If you finished 4 years out of those 5 years, you can also take the Kaigo Fukushishi Kokkashiken. If you finished all those 5 years as an SSW1 worker, you can take the Kaigo Fukushishi Kokkashiken. Remember, 3 years and above. I hope it's clear. He says here, if I pass, can I get it within 2 to 3 years of working in Japan? Can you get the Kaigo visa within 2 to 3 years of working in Japan? If you pass the Kaigo Fukushishi Kokkashiken, I think this... okay. If you pass the Kaigo Fukushishi Kokkashiken, you must register for a certification. You will need money for this, and the amount of time you will need to process the registration for a certification will not take 2 or 3 years. It will not even take 1 year. If you have all the needed requirements that are required of you, it will just take a few months. For me, it took 2 months, but that's because I'm too slow in compiling and completing all the needed requirements for my registration. Also, I don't have money at that time. How many months did you study Nihongo before going to Japan? How much it costs? Did you give JLPT or JFT? I had around, I think, 7 months of formal studies in the Japanese language before I arrived here in Japan, and I paid around 20,000 Philippine pesos. It included the payment for agency, the school, and school materials like books. I only took JLPT. I didn't took JFT or J-test and other Japanese language tests. I only took JLPT. Despite only having around 7 months of formal studies in the Japanese language, I self-studied Nihongo several years, multiple years, before I even considered working in Japan. It was a very informal kind of study, but it gave me some familiarity with hiragana, katakana, and of course, kanji. Also, the 20,000 pesos I paid doesn't include the rent for my apartment, the payment for the bills like electricity and water, and of course, food. So even though I just paid 20,000 pesos for the agency and the school materials, my expenses within those 7 months might exceed 20,000 pesos. If you want to know more about my first time experience as a caregiver here in Japan, click this card here or check the link in the video I made in the description box down below. Hi Nikko, I am an SSW Kaigo, now here in Nagoya. Wow. May I ask something? What is the difference between having Kaigo license and Kaigo Fukushishi? Have you heard about this Kaigo license? Thanks, and more views to come. Thank you as well, Dota Master 441. Kaigo Fukushishi will be your title, your official title, once you pass the Kaigo Fukushishi Kokkashiken. It's just like in the Philippines. If you're a nurse and you pass the nursing board exam in the Philippines, you will no longer be a nurse. Your title will now be a registered nurse. Same principle but different language, you get my point, right? You can think of the Kaigo Fukushishi Kokkashiken as the national board examination for all caregivers currently working here in Japan. Once you become a Kaigo Fukushishi, you will be licensed or certified. That license or certification you will receive upon passing the Kaigo Fukushishi Kokkashiken and becoming a Kaigo Fukushishi is commonly called the Kaigo license or Kaigo certificate. It looks like this. Wait. It looks like this. The Kaigo Fukushishi Torokusho, or the Kaigo Fukushishi Registration Certificate. This is your certificate. This is the Kaigo license they're talking about. It is very important to remember, however, that only those people who pass the Kaigo Fukushishi Kokkashiken and become a Kaigo Fukushishi will receive the Kaigo license or Kaigo certificate. For example, I was a caregiver, a regular caregiver, and then I passed the Kaigo Fukushishi Kokkashiken. I became a Kaigo Fukushishi. I am a Kaigo Fukushishi. That's why I have a Kaigo license or a Kaigo certificate. If you want to know more about the Kaigo Fukushishi Kokkashiken, becoming a Kaigo Fukushishi, or you want to know more about the Kaigo visa or the Kaigo license or certificate, click this card here or check the links on the videos I made in the description down below. After obtaining Kaigo visa, can I take my parents as dependents? Thanks. No. As of the making of this video, the only provision of the Kaigo visa is to allow you to bring your families here in Japan as dependents to live with you in this country. And when I say family, that only includes your spouse. If you're a guy, your wife. If you're a lady, your husband. And your husband and or your wife must be legally married to you. Plus, you can also bring your child or children here. Your child or children must be your biological son or daughter. If you have adopted a son or daughter, it must be legally adopted son or daughter. I hope it clears everything. You cannot bring your parents here. Sadly, for those of you who haven't seen my videos about the Kaigo visa, about the most powerful visa for caregivers here in Japan, click this card here or check the link in the description down below. So that's it. Those were some of the recent questions I received in the channel. If you have any follow-up questions or corrections in everything I just said, please do leave a comment and correct me if I'm wrong. If you've learned something from this video, please do leave a like and a comment. And of course, share this video with an interested friends. If you haven't subscribed yet, laway, please subscribe. Thank you so much for your time watching this video. See you in the next one. Babush.